And it's Ojeda?
Close enough.
Close enough. Yeah. If I say that, you're not gonna.
No,
What is it though?
It's Ojeda.
Ojeda.
So like that D is kind of like a TH-ish.
Ojeda. Yeah,
Like
and then
with
I'm gonna
the
get
A
too
at the
fancy.
end, man. Yeah,
and then
no.
I'll get too fancy with it,
It's
and I'll
all
sound
good.
like an idiot.
Everyone says Ojeda for the most
Yeah.
part.
All right. I'll just say Ojeda.
Yeah, I'm used to that, man.
Yeah. Tim Ojeda, assistant strength and conditioning coach. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I wanted to have you because it's really interesting. I'm working on this story that's tracing kind of the evolution of sports performance, recovery, training, and I saw your bio and I saw what you're doing. You're playing football at Eastern New Mexico in the early 2000s. Can you just sort of trace for me, broadly, what's gone on since then? What have been the changes?
Talking about with me or with sports?
With
talking
sports
about
performance, yeah.
So I say a lot has gone on, to be honest. When we think about collegiate strength and conditioning, it's really only been going on since probably like 1970.
Yeah.
So we're relatively young as far as a profession. So we're coming up on 50 years now or so. So in 2000, wasn't a whole lot going on everywhere. I think the two biggest things that I kind of see that really stick out for the past decade or so is going to be the importance. Let me think how to say this. Awareness and resources, I guess is what I would say, has really changed. Awareness, when we think about that, it's kind of the old school way back in the day. Strength and conditioning coach wasn't a necessity. It was looked at kind of like as a luxury. Some schools have it, some didn't. Coming up in this more modern current age of things, every school is going to have one now. So I think they saw the importance of having a specialized individual. That kind of leads into the next part of it, being the resources, I think have really changed because they saw it as more of an importance. Schools have started to dump money in particular into incredible training facilities, first and foremost, that can house entire teams, multiple teams all at once. And then with that has been department resources. So even in the beginning, when you kind of look at things, if a school had 2 strength and conditioning coaches, like that was kind of a big deal. Now we're looking at this shift because they've put more resources in. We have 5 to 10 kind of at any major school for sure. Along with some of the resources, we kind of hit on it when we were talking outside a little bit, but now we have a bigger department. So we have usually the medical staff and us have always gone side by side. So that's your athletic trainers, physical therapists, doctors. We've always communicated and kind of been together trying to help the athletes. But really what's come in now is sports dietitians, sports psychologists, director of sports performance is now all part of our team that we can tap into. It used to be, if you think about it back then, there was strength coaches who would have to do, like, physically make the post-training smoothies, would have to set out the pre-training snacks if we had any. Along with that stuff, if there was any data that you wanted, whether it's, doing laser timers or trying to figure out an athlete's workload over a course of a day or week or month, taking RPEs is what it's called, things like that. Like, you'd have to do it yourself. So you'd have to administer it. You'd have to bring it in. You'd have to break down the data yourself. Now in each one of those departments, we have someone else that we can go to. So it takes less of our plate and things that we may not be super specialized in, allow us to really focus on what's happening, what we can control, and then get everyone else's advice who is a specialist, who's a professional in it.
Right. So that makes a lot of sense from the staff's perspective, but what about from the athlete's perspective? What was it like when you were at Eastern New Mexico compared to what it is like at a premier university like USC today? And how much of that was because it's USC versus Eastern New Mexico? You said every school's got these strength and conditioning coaches now.
Right. That's kind of, I don't know how to really think and answer that.
Like, did you have a strength coach? Was your strength coach putting up the orange slices or before lifting or what?
Essentially, yeah. We didn't really have when I started, we didn't have a dedicated strength and conditioning coach there. We had a football coach who also was the strength and conditioning coach. And it was good, but it's the same thing. Smaller facilities back then. I've been very fortunate that I've basically chased great facilities. When I was in high school, we actually had a coach who came from NAU, became our strength and conditioning coach in high school. He was also a football coach, but once he got there, we got a brand new facility. Same thing when I went to a junior college next, and it was the same thing. Brand new facility the year after I got there. So I've kind of been right at the coming up of everything, where I went from having one rack and a bench press to having an entire room full of things and someone there to help us.
Right. What do you think has changed in terms of the theory of strength and conditioning training? What practices with, getting into the nitty gritty, what's changed? Is it still just those compound lifts for a lot of sports? I mean, you do a lot of stuff that's got to be sport specific, shoulders for water polo. Yeah.
So now, for me, like I can try to argue people on this all day. We're talking about kind of philosophical differences.
Sure.
So like if someone said something about being sport specific, I would ask you, how do you define sport specific?
I would just define it on the overuse of certain body parts. like where are they most injury prone?
Right. So that's a decent way to look at it. What happened is sport specific started off as a great term because it actually meant something. With kind of how things have shifted, it kind of got away, especially like if you look at things like on YouTube, because we have all this stuff available to us now. Like this term sport specific got just carried away in the extreme direction.
Right.
So when you look at it like that, I personally kind of have this, what I consider, it was kind of taught to me, a sports general approach. Okay, strengthen the system as opposed to strengthening a movement on an athlete. If I told you, like if I took, let's take water polo for instance, I can always use them because they're such a unique sport because they never touch the ground, right? It's quite different from anything else. They never push off a wall. Nothing. So we use an Olympic style of weightlifting when we do stuff. So if we're talking about like doing cleans and snatches, if someone said that's not sport specific because they never push off the ground, I can counter that, saying that the entire purpose of doing that movement is to try to recruit and strengthen as many fast twitch muscle fibers as you possibly can. Because when they go do something, if they sprint for a ball or when they lunge out of the water to take a shot, it is very fast and explosive. So if I can manipulate that system so they can utilize it in their sport, then it's sports specific. Mm-hmm. I can say the same thing like with a swing in baseball or softball. Someone who's like might think a sport specific movement is tying a stick to a weight rack and like trying to swing it to get those muscles stronger. That's actually could hinder the athlete's performance more than it can help them. The moment you load something in that pattern, you might be changing their specific movement pattern. But I can take a medicine ball, throw it into a wall, and I can work on the exact same muscles that they utilize within their swing and the synchronization of it. Right, so that's sports specific. Now that may seem maybe you can only do that with baseball because they swing a bat. I can say that movement is actually very sports specific for water polo as well.
Right.
When they come out and shoot a ball, really what's happening, and we had this conversation with my coach one time, is he was trying to get their hips to turn. So we're able to use a medicine ball the exact same way a baseball player would to synchronize his hips turning and using this sling that goes from his hip all the way to his shoulder to create more power. So even though it's the same movement for baseball, it's very similar and can work for water polo, right? So it's still sports specific.
Right. When does it become too close to being the type of sports specific you thought was bad? Like when does a medicine ball become too small of a medicine ball, or like you're not working power, or a sandbag? It's not really a sandbag. Like I get that you can use the sandbag, the medicine ball, but when does the sandbag or the medicine ball get too close to the baseball swing you were talking about earlier that could alter their actual swing?
I think it's when you actually try to mimic the exact movement.
Okay.
Right, and that's the big thing, right? Is why they hire us as a strength coach as opposed to hiring us as a sport coach. If I was a major league batting coach and then went into the weight room and said, "Hey, this is exactly we have to throw this," I might have a chance. But since I'm not a batting coach, for me to go in there and have someone pick up a different object and say, "Hey, we're going to do it just like we swing," if I don't know all the little things of their swing or throw or shot, whatever it is, then that's where it kind of can get
So
real
now we're getting
fuzzy.
into the theory of first, second, third wave adaptations, right? Are you basically saying that as a strength coach, the role is to develop the base of the athlete, and that those second and third wave adaptations that are for the sport should be developed in the sport?
Yes, absolutely.
And is that the philosophy that most athletic programs have today at the collegiate level?
A lot of the coaches that I personally know, yes. I don't associate with a whole lot of people,
Okay.
but the ones that I do know and we talk and stuff, we're all basically on the same page. And I've been to a lot of different conferences and stuff like that where I think a lot of us are pushing that way. There's a few that might be the other direction, but I don't really converse with them too much because I don't know a whole lot of people.
Was there a time where things got wonky between, I think you said the 70s or 80s and now? It seems like now is like how the 70s and 80s might have been. It's like just do a deadlift or do a squat or do a pull up. That kind of seems basic, and that kind of seems like the foundation you're building now with athletes. Was there a time when things got weird in like the early 2000s, or I don't know when it might have been, but when the sport specific stuff got a little out of control?
The exact years I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
But it always it's kind of funny because it always goes through these kind of same little waves of things. Like something becomes popular and then it gets overused, or like it just gets too crazy, and then they kind of get back to the basics, and then someone develops something else and it gets kind of crazy and they kind of get back to the basics. When you look at it, like I said, this real general approach, your body can only do so many things. You can push or pull something, you can squat or hinge, you can lunge. I'm sure there's something in there that I'm missing that someone's going to be mad at me that I didn't include, but there's only so many things you can do. So when you're talking about strengthening your body, like you can't get too crazy. You can, but then once again, I think our goal is to, like I said, strengthen the system, right? That's what I'm going to keep going back to. You were talking about the second and third wave adaptations of things, which is great. So that's the ability for everything that we did, the foundation that we built, to transfer over to their sport. That's
at a
up
higher
to the
level.
That's up to the sport coach to refine those movements that athlete does, and for that athlete to be able to apply the strength and power that they have developed into those movements.
So what advances have you seen in strength and conditioning that have allowed you as a strength and conditioning coach, or you as an athlete over time? What have you seen since the early 2000s to today that have allowed you or other coaches to do a better job of building that foundation?
So some of the bigger advances, and it's the time we're living in, right? We're in the golden age of technology, essentially. So the availability of different devices that at one time may have been too expensive for a school to afford, there was only a couple of them ever made, those are now more readily available. There's more companies making these devices, which makes them a little less expensive.
What devices?
So if you look at something, probably the newest thing that's really catching on in the past few years, and it's been around for a while, but are these GPS monitoring systems. So it's something you can physically put on an athlete, and whether they're at practice, during a game,
in the classroom.
They're not going to do much in the classroom though, right? They're just going to be sitting there, hopefully.
Verifying that they're there.
Yeah.
Make sure the assistant coach doesn't have to come check on them.
I think we have an app for that now. They got to check in.
There you go.
But yeah, so we're able to put these devices on them. And before, you kind of have this general idea of how you need to prepare somebody. Like, hey, I'm working with a football player. I know that they should be about X amount of fit. And that can change from one coach to the next, but you have a relative place to they need to be fit for this. The cool thing with the GPS technology is now we're actually able to monitor their workloads during a game, during practice. So in the summertime, as you're preparing them for practice, you have hard data to compare to. Like, hey, I know this is what we do in practice. So when we're doing our conditioning, whatever it may be, I know that everything needs to be geared so they can complete practice and not be tired and injured and those kind of things. There's a bunch of other technology out there, the old school things, and they're not old, but they're called Tendo units, and it's a thing you can strap on a bar and it can tell you how fast the bar moves. All right, I said those used to be really, really expensive, and it's really hard to get for every school to have those. Now there's other apps that you can actually access on your phone that you can put a clip on your bar and it can tell you those things. You can still buy the Tendos, but there's other people competing in the same market, so it brings the price down, but you can follow those things as you go through your training program. And, it's not always about weight. I can't just more weight doesn't mean more adaptation. It may be the bar speed itself. It may be the quality of movement, but there's a way to track those now that there hasn't really been available to everybody in the past.
Right. So I'm hearing a few different things there. I'm hearing some innovations that are allowing for more injury prevention. I'm hearing something about this allows for better recovery, or to make sure the athlete is recovered for the next training session. Where does the strength and conditioning coach, are you coordinating with the athletic trainers, or with, I don't know if there's specific recovery or physical therapy staff? How does that work?
So when it comes to the whole recovery thing, I think it's a thing that might be overlooked by someone necessarily not in our profession. Really, when it all comes down to it, everything that we do is just a stress or a stimulus to an athlete, whether it's practice, strength training, school, personal life. It's all stress that adds up. The most important thing, if you're talking about trying to increase performance and staying injury free for the most you can, is recovery. That's the biggest missing piece. And it's really, to kind of go on with some of the other stuff, is where we've shifted the last few years, mainly because there's more research out there now. There's studies showing what's important, why it's important. So absolutely, just because I keep training a kid, doesn't mean that they're going to increase performance. So we're always talking with the athletic training staff, but we're also communicating with the athletes themselves. We know when it's midterms, we know these things, and in a perfect world, you're able to kind of manipulate your side of the job to help them get through that part of it, because it's just more stress. Some of the big things with recovery, like I said, the biggest thing that's really going to be pushed in the next few years, and has been for a while, but is going to be sleep. Sleep's going to be huge.
Are you going to be going into kids' rooms, making sure they're blacked out? Are you going to be handing out blackout curtains at orientation day? I mean, what are we doing?
All we
here?
can do is recommend things. Say, hey, I recommend you get 8 hours of sleep. Doesn't mean they're going to do it, right?
Yeah.
That's just anything else. Hey, you should go. In all reality, as far as college sports go, we only get so much time with them that we can physically make them do things. When it falls outside of that time, you can no longer tell the coach on them or those things. So recovery is one of those things. If we're talking about trying to get as much training as we can in a certain amount of time, if you only get 45 minutes, that's going to be really hard to get all the recovery you need to. So at the end of it, you can recommend that they recover. You can do some voluntary recovery things, but if they don't show up, it's still on them. It's still always on the athlete.
Yeah. So what about this sleep thing? You said it's going to be big. It already is. It already is. But
yeah, it already is. I mean, that's one of the biggest things for recovery, is you getting sleep. For a college athlete, that's hard, because not only they have to go to practice and they have to go to strength training, then they have to go to class, and then they have to study for class. So that's hard. Like, how do you?
What do you think about that? Do you have fun training at the collegiate level when there's all that stuff? Especially at a university like USC, where it's like there's so many different things they're trying to brand, like, oh, that we're an elite academic university, but also elite athletic university. It's like, that's so complicated. Like, I want to just coach at Boise State, where we don't worry about academic. Well, I'm not going to say they don't worry about it, but it's not the same pressure on all these different facets. There's not as much stress, right? The athlete can.
I wouldn't say that necessarily, because every athlete's trying to pass their classes. So
Sure.
I understand that, we say we're USC and it is an extremely elite academic school. But I mean, that personally doesn't factor into how I treat the kids, because at the end of the day, they still have to do what they're supposed to do. A big part of my job is, I feel, one of the things why I like doing it is because I'm trying to help these kids with life. Not everyone's going to be a professional athlete.
Right.
So I want to teach them lessons along the way of discipline, hard work, just even having a positive attitude to life. So if someone comes in and I know they've had midterms and like, oh, it's so hard, and I know we're an elite school, and I know these things, but life's not going to get easier when you leave here. You're going to have a job. You're going to have to keep a job. You're going to have a family. Like, you can't get fired and try to support them. So nothing's going to get easier, to an extent.
Yeah. So you're talking about recovery. How much do you think that for strength and conditioning, it's kind of been figured out. That first wave adaptation, it's kind of been figured out. That's what I'm hearing from you. It's like you deadlift, you do pull-ups, you do whatever. I mean, I'm not saying it how you would say it, but do you think that's kind of figured out, and that the innovation is really in these other areas? Like, how can I recover faster to train again? How can I recover faster so that I can perform better the next time?
Yeah, yes and no. I don't think it's been figured out. Even if we go back to kind of some of the earlier talk when we're talking about like the 1970s and stuff like that, it's kind of, to an extent, there's science behind it, obviously, but it's trial and error. You've had these early wave of innovators for our profession develop these models, develop these philosophies on how to train, but no one ever just sticks to that one. There might be 5 different models, and you might use a little bit of each one of them to get to where you think you need to be. So it's still trial and error, and it's based on your philosophy, on what you think is going to work, what you've seen work. So nothing's been figured out. It has, but it hasn't. You know what I mean?
So give me an example of that with different kids. Like with one kid, you're trying something, and with one kid, you're trying something else, or with one team, you're doing this, or one team, you're doing that. Give me some examples of that, where you're trying different things.
So absolutely. When you talk about different kids, it also comes into kind of where they are in their development.
Right.
If you've had a kid that it is their first year lifting, you're going to do a lot more basic things with them than if you've had someone who's been lifting since they were 5.
Yeah.
Right. So you can do more advanced things with them. So that alone can separate you, just how long someone's been lifting or how quick someone can pick up movements. That can be completely different. Year to year is completely different. Like, I don't just have one training program that I use every year with water polo, for instance, right? I've had the same team for 8 years since I've been here. We have never done the exact same program every year. So it's still like, we'll do something and I'll look back at the end of the season. Hey, was this the best thing we could have done at that time? No, I need to change it. So I try to change something the next year, and it goes with the same thing. So you're always trying to adapt to what you're doing, and also the year changes. The teams you play are different. Are you winning and losing could change. I hope that never changes my program to an extent, but it's going to factor in to a little bit.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I don't know where I want to go with this now. It's interesting, but
good, yeah.
Trying to think, huh? So you really, that's interesting. I don't know.
With the cool part about the recovery part of it is that with some of this technology, there's more recovery aids, and it's more readily available as well.
Right. So do you have like 50 Normatechs lined up for all the guys after each session?
Yeah, we don't have 50 of them, no, but we have. They're available.
It's USC. Come on.
So same thing. If the athlete wants to do it, it's there. They're still expensive. We still got to purchase them.
Like
but,
$2,000 a pop. Yeah.
You know. But there's, like you said, there's Normatechs, right? There's what they call...
Are they doing a lot of percussive stuff, like the Theraguns or the deep muscle? Yeah.
So Theraguns being that it basically looks like a table saw.
Yeah.
Right?
I have one.
With a soft thing attached to it, right?
Yeah.
So you're basically giving yourself a massage afterwards that, if you were lucky enough, you might buy one massage a week if you had the money and wanted to spend it. But now you can basically get one every day if you wanted it.
Yeah, yeah. No, the biggest thing I've found is I was really into like static stretching before and after, and now that I have the Theragun, I'm getting mobility in ways that I never had before. Just because you couldn't stretch your way out of some of that shit that I had, like messed up in my glutes or hips or whatever, all tight up and knotted. So, our athletes, I don't know, where are you on the whole? An athlete is gifted, or an athlete can work their way into performance thing. I've talked to different strength and performance coaches about it. I've heard stories of guys who just walk up their first year, they haven't done strength training and are squatting perfect, and not perfect, but very well and heavy. Where are you on that?
It's both. There isn't. You have people who are extremely talented and can play their sport so well, but then can't move a weight. You have people who are pretty good at their sport and can train extremely hard and work themselves into a starting role, into a professional role. So there's both that happen. You want to be able to facilitate both. So hopefully that athlete who's extremely gifted and may not like the weight room, you want to get him to where he enjoys the weight room and wants to come down there, because now we're focusing for him. He's so good already. you may be able to help him a little bit with some strength and things like that. But really, if that's where he's going, you're really hoping that the injury reduction part of it comes into play.
Right.
So you want him in there to train and try to get stronger or more resilient so he can continue to play and play and play and even become better. Hopefully you can make him a little bit faster and jump a little bit higher, those things, right? But it's injury reduction. The other kid, who you know is going to do everything right, who's going to recover properly, who's going to do everything you ask him to do, you just want to give him every resource he has so he can step on the field or so he can be successful in life, as I had alluded to earlier.
Yeah, that's good. I think your bosses will like that. You're always throwing in the life thing. But
well, that's truly what I believe. It's
believe you.
That's not to be PC, man. I believe it.
What innovations, whether it's the Theragun or the Normatec or just having blackout curtains, getting better sleep in college, what do you think would have made a big difference for you? Because you said it's both. You said it's I don't know. I don't know if you were, like the kid who was following all the directions when you were at Eastern New Mexico, or you were somewhere in between. You were doing everything you could and you were just limited by talent. But what do you think would have made a difference for you?
Hindsight.
Yeah, hindsight. Let's talk.
Hindsight, man.
Not because I want you to think about what could have been, woulda, shoulda, coulda, but because I'm trying to capture what all these tools mean and where performance has been and where it's going.
Right. So like I said, hindsight's the biggest thing, man. If I'd have known everything I know now, I would have approached a couple things differently.
All right.
I was an extremely hardworking individual, if you ask me personally.
Yeah.
I was a whole lot of effort kind of everything I do because I wasn't the fastest. I'm obviously not the biggest person.
Right.
So mine was, I had to work for it. Very fortunate that I had a great strength coach when I was in high school. So that started me out. I mean, he's impacted me so much that I'm doing what I do now because of that man.
Right.
I'll never forget him. I can never thank him enough. So my parents and all that stuff gave me a great work ethic prior to that stuff. All these great things that I've relied on my whole life. I just didn't know everything that I know now. Like I said, it's kind of advanced to where there's more knowledge out there. And I didn't study that when I was in college, necessarily speaking. So I learned these things, and we had an ice bath, but it was 3 dudes in there, and it's legitimately just a little black tub outside your field house. And I loved it, though. I'd get in there every day during camp.
Yeah.
But, we didn't have a Theragun, but I had a baseball. So I would do soft tissue on a baseball in my house. I'd look back and be like, you know what? I could have done more, though, knowing what I know now. The days you think you're tired, like, oh, I just don't want to do anything, you could have rolled out. It's
right.
5 minutes. Like, maybe that would have saved my hamstring from being pulled. Who knows, right? But so it's just hindsight for me.
And you said it's both with performance too, with talent versus work ethic in terms of going pro. How do you think about that in terms of the things that are out there today and the knowledge you have now in terms of what could have been?
For me personally?
Yeah.
It's a little too small, man. A little too small, a little too not good.
So more a talent and size thing than a work ethic thing.
I'm going to tell myself that to make myself feel better.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So where are you philosophically, I guess, if we're looking at this talent, I guess the evolution of sports performance, right? We see records being broken in sports like track. Do you think that the football that's played today is at a higher level in general on average than the football that was played when you were at Eastern New Mexico? How do you think about that?
I think I'm close enough to it to where I don't see it. If I was maybe even a few more years removed, maybe, possibly. But I look at football and I still see football.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest difference, just say, for me in particular, going from Eastern to here, is just the size of the individual. Honestly, they're a little bit quicker, but the game hasn't changed for me since I've played that much. I still see it the same. It still looks the same to me. I don't look out there and be like, oh man, this is crazy. All right. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on that end of it.
Yeah. Just an eyeball test. It's always a curious thing to think about. It's like, just being a fan, sometimes I'm thinking like, man, they're faster, they're stronger, they're better today in the NFL. But then I'm like, wait, Ed Reed, Troy Polamalu. I don't know these guys.
Exactly.
It's like who. Yeah, and how do you measure instincts and intangibles that some of those guys have for playmaking, that they might be slightly less athletic? So I think that's part of what makes sport interesting in a way that there may not be as much creativity, at least I thought, in training, but you're saying there is to try out all these different things.
There's all kinds of stuff always being tested.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah. So what are some things you guys are trying out right now?
Oh man, I mean we're not doing anything too crazy.
Nothing.
No.
You're playing it safe.
I wouldn't say playing it safe, but like I said, a lot of the kids may not come from a high level of training prior to coming here. Football is kind of a different sport because usually you start training in the weight room for football at a younger age than most other sports.
Yeah.
Like when we have recruits come in for water polo, for volleyball, for basketball, some of them have never even lifted weights. Like I'd ask a question like, hey, how many of you guys have trained before? And, maybe one or two people raise their hand. It's becoming a little bit more now. There's more club teams and stuff like that are trying to incorporate it. But they're at such a young age, training-wise, a training age, that you can't do all these crazy, fancy things that some people are doing that you can do with someone who's been lifting for 20 years. And, you're trying to get them 5 pounds stronger. Then you start doing some of these cool, crazy, creative things to help them. Don't necessarily need it with someone who, if you just lift, you're going to get stronger. You're going to get bigger if that's your goal, faster, all those things.
So I'm curious, we talked a lot about the strength, but on the conditioning, all these sports have different time domains. How do you look at and how do you program for those different time domains in terms of conditioning for the athletes?
Right. So when we look at that, it's an energy system demand is what we refer to it as. The big thing is trying to find out exactly what energy system their sport plays in. So there's multiple, obviously, right? You have a sprinter versus a marathon runner. It's two completely different energy systems. And in a lot of sports kind of dabble in a couple different ones, so you have to be able to train for both of them. Mm-hmm. You take someone like basketball, who I've recently started working with. As I was doing my research, I was really looking into what I feel we need the most. It'd be anaerobic capacity, so your ability to repeatedly sprint without really fatiguing too much.
Okay.
But because they move nonstop, there's an aerobic component to it. So you still want to have some aerobic capacity as well. So you have to be able to train both of them to what you think is fit for whatever your coach needs.
And even down to the position, right? Like Kevin Durant doesn't need to be as strong as Julius Randle or whatever. They're very different players, but as a mix, they add up to a team.
Right.
So is that where you kind of have to talk with the coach, or do you communicate with the coach, or do you kind of know this player is this position, whether power forward or a point guard? And because really they need very different levels of strength in a sport like basketball, which is interesting to an extent.
I mean, they all need to be strong.
Right.
Everyone's boxing somebody out. Everyone's trying to move around somebody at some point in time. So you still, even your post players, you still want them agile. Yeah. You want them to be able to move and change direction. So that's when it comes into like, are you trying to be too specific? Now you can still break it down, right? Point. You can still break it down into what you need.
Yeah. I see your point though on leaving that stuff to the coach though.
Right.
Like I kind of sounded ridiculous right there.
No, you're good. No,
but I did. Let's be honest. Like trying to be like, yeah, Kevin Durant. Well, but Kevin Durant kind of just adapted to be that way throughout his career. I wouldn't say someone programmed Kevin to be that.
He is who he is.
Yeah.
You can take
so a lot of these athletes are who they are, and it's the coach. It's the chemistry they develop. I don't know.
Now you can take a sport like soccer, which might give you a little bit better of like thought process behind that, because your back line may not have to run as much as your midfielders and stuff like that, right? So then when you talk about conditioning per position group, it might make more sense. Same with football. Your big guys aren't going to be running as much as your skilled players.
Right.
So when you think about conditioning on that aspect, then that's when you can get more position specific, not even just sports specific. Mm-hmm. So for instance, just say with a football player, you may have your DBs and receivers running a little bit more long distance stuff, doing like flying 40s or, whatever you may be, 60s, stuff like that, just for conditioning purposes, even though they don't do it all the time. but you're working that. Well, you can have your linemen doing sled pushes because that's how they condition. They're pushing people on the line on both sides of it. So if you can condition them using sled pushes, now you're being specific towards exactly what they do.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a good point. Do you think you have any student athletes or kids that you can think of off the top of your head who not just take their training regiment particularly seriously, like you mentioned you did at Eastern New Mexico, but are also noticing this trend on sleep and performance and recovery, who you've noticed who are particularly going all in on that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I can name someone, at least from each one of my teams, who I see doing a great job of trying to cover all their bases.
Yeah.
The biggest one, like if you want the biggest outlier I've ever seen, would be Porter Gustin.
Okay.
The dude is like, he's obsessed, borderline obsessed with it, but like in the best way possible.
Mm-hmm.
If I showed up to the weight room at 5 o'clock, this guy would be there at 5:01 asking me, or any coach, like why the training room isn't open yet. Because he wants to get in there and start foam rolling it, and we don't have a session until 6. All right, he already wants to get going.
Yeah.
So he did everything in the world to take care of his body. If I left at 7:30, like when I walked out, he'd just be done foam rolling it and getting ready to get in the ice tub or into the Normatec. So the dude it was crazy. He was extremely particular about his meal timing. Like he knew exactly what he had to eat, like down to the calorie, when he had to eat it, and like wouldn't miss it. If he was off by like 5 minutes, he'd be perturbed.
And what team was he on?
He was a football player.
Okay, and what position did he play?
Linebacker.
Okay, and what is he doing now? You said he graduated?
He just graduated. You know what? He's on a professional team somewhere. I don't even know, man.
Okay.
One of those teams.
I'll have to try to get in contact with him. It'd be interesting to contrast him with someone like Pat Hayden, who's like, yeah, I was just touching my toes and then I started sprinting. But
we have a couple kids like it's on each one of my teams. Like I can look at my men's water polo team. I have 2 guys, and some of these people might be at a necessity because they're kind of old and beat up.
Yeah.
But they do a good job of taking care of their bodies. So I have 2 guys named Matt Meyer and Mladen Dasic. Both those guys, every time I go into the training room, they're doing something with our athletic trainer, Sandy, like all the time. On the women's side, we have our athlete named Kelsey. Same thing. She's always in there, always doing something. It could be rehab stuff. It could just be rolling out. Whatever. It could be physical therapy stuff. They're always in there. On the Normatec as well as I walk by. Those cats are always in there. Like on the women's volleyball team, Jenna Adams. She's a senior graduate. She graduated already. She's a senior this year. Same thing. She does a great job. When we get done with weights, I see her going into the training room, and she's already in the Normatec right away. I have another girl named Amelia Huesca, who's a freshman. By herself, not by me telling her, like after weights, she'll start rolling out. On her own, I try to get her. I said, hey, get a couple more people to stay with you and do this stuff, right? And she got a couple people here and there, but she's always there. So there's debate, you can say that rolling after weights is good for you or not, right? There's debate amongst the community. Wherever you fall, she thinks it works for her, and she goes out of her way to do it. Like, that's awesome to me.
And what do they say? What do they say to you about it? Do they say like, "Oh, I feel so much better," or "I feel healthier," or "I feel like this is helping my performance"?
I'll always ask them.
Talk to you? Yeah.
They'll talk to me. I ask them when they're a senior. Usually around your junior years, senior years, when people start realizing, because your body gets a little bit older, gets a little more beat up, a little more wear and tear on it. You're not as old, you don't recover not as young.
Right.
You don't recover as well.
Yeah.
So usually when they start doing it their junior year or so, I'll ask them like, how you feeling? Like, oh, a lot better. I'm like, don't you wish you started doing this when you were a freshman? They're like, yeah, I wish. I'm like, good. Well, tell the freshmen this. Like, make them do it with you. Get them involved.
And is it a feel thing, or do they feel like it makes a difference in performance?
It's both, I do believe.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's really interesting with like ice baths and things like that. The research is mixed, but like when you talk to the athletes, it's like ultimately these high performing athletes, they're like, most of them say, I do the ice bath because it helps me feel better.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter to me if it's a placebo, because I feel better, I feel more recovered to train harder.
Exactly.
So whereas some of these other things, where like the myofascial release, like there's a little more research on it, that it will help with performance or mobility or whatnot. But it's interesting to hear. I just, it's so hard to measure is what I'm getting from you.
Absolutely.
It seems like it's feel, but
because there's so many other things that go into it too. Like I said, there's all your outside stressors.
yeah.
So all that stuff adds into it, and if climbing in a dark chamber for 20 minutes gives you peace of mind, then like you can't measure peace of mind when you go step on a field, right? Because sports is also so mental driven, especially.
What are those called? They're like tank. They're like a something tank, right?
Submersion.
Yeah, they're like
or immersion. Sorry, not
yeah.
submersion. Something like that.
Like immersion tanks.
Yes.
And you're like floating in like lukewarm water or something, right?
Absolutely.
And just pitch black. Have you tried it?
I have not. I would try it. There's also the cryo chambers. I would try those just to try it. I'm always down to try
don't
something.
Get your feet wet. But
I'm always down to try anything like on those just to see how does it feel? Like if I did that, would I feel ready? Do I feel better? I can go lift, I can go run, I can go do those things.
Yeah, I haven't tried the cryotherapy either. I've done the ice bath. USC's nuts. I swear the culture here is crazy. But kids have like ice baths. They're I don't know if you've seen the YouTube videos, but kids have like ice baths that they're making out of deep freezers.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
Yeah. You can go on YouTube and watch it. But I went over to my friend's house, and I'll be 100% honest. I'm not sure that all the people are doing it for athletic performance, whether it's to stay skinny, to stay skinny in that LA culture. But the ice bath is making waves. I don't know, but
I said my strength coach in high school is awesome. I'll always refer back to him, but like he knew about this stuff. Obviously, I didn't study it. He did. And he never told us what the science behind it was. He would just tell us what to do, essentially.
What do you think works for you?
I used to love the ice bath. Yeah. I learned that in high school. That same thing. I squatted real heavy one day. I was sore as all get out the next day. I talked to him. He said, hey, when you go home, have your parents stop by, get 2 big old bags of ice, throw it in the tub, sit in there for 20 minutes. Okay, coach, you got it. Like next day, I was like, I actually feel a little better. That's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
And so for me, that worked. It's not fun to sit in a cold tub for 20 minutes, so I like contrasting it. I like kind of going hot and cold, which is another theory that people think can and cannot work.
Right.
I love doing some soft tissue stuff, but the older I get, I need to mobilize my body before I get moving.
Right, warming up a lot and get it feeling good before you squat heavy or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for specific sports, you mentioned water polo, stuff like that. Are they? I assume they're working with the trainer on specific areas, whether it's their hips or like for water polo, often hips or shoulders are an issue. Is that what you're seeing with these athletes who are putting in extra work, or is it just again general?
It's general. It's everything is kind of it all depends on the individual, on the sports team. All that stuff factors in, so there's no I can never tell you it's this way.
Right.
Usually, if you're seeing the athletic trainer, it's usually because something has already become injured to some extent or doesn't feel right, so you're trying to fix that problem kind of after it's happened. With the kids who are really good, who go in there, they're doing like prehab is kind of what it's called, so prehabilitation, so to fix those sites before they become a real nagging problem. So there's some of that, but we also include a lot of that stuff in our strength and conditioning training. Like I do know of the common sites of injury for every sport, and within our training, I'm making sure I'm trying to strengthen or mobilize that particular area before it becomes hurt.
Yeah, like for water polo, I mean, bad shoulders, we're just staying on the topic, but like you said, snatch is really important.
Mm-hmm.
I bet there's a lot of kids who snatch is not so fun at the start of the year.
It's just learning the movement. The big thing is, as long as they're capable of doing it, if they don't have an injury that stops them, they can get there eventually.
And are they fully capable when they start?
Movement pattern wise, it's hard.
Thing?
Movement pattern. Sometimes there's kids that don't have the proper mobility. So with those kids, you kind of steer clear of that and have them do some other things that are similar. If it's a major issue, when you talk about mobility, it can be one of two things. It can be an actual joint issue. So if their joint itself doesn't get that range of motion, I can never give it to them no matter what I do with them. They're stuck there. So I can't have them snatch in that case, right? But, if it's something like their T-spine just isn't super mobile, once you've been working with them for a while and work on some mobility for the T-spine and they can get that range of motion, then they can get it up there, and usually not too big of a problem.
Right.
Coordination is the big thing with some of these more complex movements.
Yeah. Do you think, all right, I don't like the answer you're giving me because it's like, because it's frustrating. It's like, it's a little bit of art. It's a little bit of science. It's hard to say. We got to try out all these different things. Do you think in general, on average, you can say some developments or innovations that happened. I don't care if it's like, yeah, we learned 5x5 is really good, or it's a Normatec. Do you think there's some things that in general and on average have moved the general collegiate athlete's performance incrementally higher?
Consistency. Consistency is the key. If you're training 5 days a week, doesn't matter what you're doing, you're going to get better. If you're recovering 5 days a week, you're going to get better. It's that simple. It's just, and it's shifted that way to where, you know, a sports coach may only lift one time during the week in season, or no times because it's a big game that week. It used to kind of be like that here and there. Now it's well practiced that, hey, it doesn't matter if you're in season, out of season, like you're training multiple times a week. So it's just the pure consistency of training.
So that doesn't seem like something you couldn't have not done in the 80s.
No.
You could have been consistent in the 80s.
They just didn't know. Or they might have known, that just wasn't practiced. I won't say they didn't know, because they're still smart in the 80s.
So the biggest thing that's made a difference is putting into practice what we now know is consistency. Putting into practice consistency.
Yeah, the application of all the knowledge we've obtained in the past 50 years of doing this.
Is there anything else beyond consistency that you think is applied more and better now than in the past decades?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you that one.
All right. We'll leave it with consistency then.
I didn't train with Pat Hayden, you know?
All right. Anything else that I missed or should have touched on that you think is important in regard to strength and conditioning?
I don't even know what I was saying half the time, man.
All right. Tim Ojeda, thank you.
I'll say thank you guys so much. I appreciate you.
Yep.